Boutte. So Philip has been working as a costume concept artist, production designer for film, music, video, and television for the past 14 years. Within the last few years, he has illustrated for a multitude of blockbuster hits, including Marvel's Black Panther, Maleficent 2, Mistress of Evil, Quentin Tarantino's Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, Captain Marvel, Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 2, Avengers Infinity War, Thor, Man of Steel, Inception, Star Trek 2 and 3, The Justice League, Marvel's Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D., The Greatest Showman, and most recently, the upcoming Jungle Cruise starring Dwayne Johnson, Godzilla vs. Kong, and the highly anticipated live-action reboot, He-Man Masters of the Universe. He has also produced, designed several music videos for artists such as Ariana Grande, the Black Keys, Panic at the Disco, Tiesto featuring Busta Rhymes, Travis McCoy, Fifi Dobson, Hot Chili Ray, Saint Motel, and the UK band The Blackout. Philip currently lives in Valencia, California with his lovely wife Jessica, daughter Alina Jellybean, a cat named Frida Kahlo, and a miniature Aussie named Terry. So with that, if we could give a round of applause to Philip, and we'll be passing it over to him.
Thank you guys very much. And thank you for having me here today. And thanks for the invitation. I owe a great deal of thanks to my buddy Jason, who was my roommate in college and a great friend to this day. So I wanted to start off by saying that I think when you think about all these things, right, I've accomplished all of these things, but a lot of the times, it's hard to see what the journey is, and you only see the end result of everyone's work, right? But ultimately, one of the key things that that kind of pushes and drives people is also knowing you can do it, right? So having the examples of saying, I can do this, I can see someone like me that's doing this, or however you need to formulate that into motivation to keep moving forward. And so I want to try to give you guys some of that today, specifically because people talked to me. I remember when I was in college, or even before that point, I had mentors along the way that kind of guided me or believed in me. And one of the things that I think is really important too is to have people that see you not for what you've accomplished, but your potential. That's a key point that I want you guys to remember, is to look for mentors that see your potential, and then do your best work to try and impress upon them that you can do the job, but also show up. I think one of the key things that I was taught, I remember initially, was to be a self-starter, right? So to be a self-starter, I was taught that if you didn't have work, to make your own work. That is something that I've always tried to kind of keep in my mind. And so I kind of want to show you guys a presentation today of work and things that I've worked on, and kind of how that process works. So I'll show you my job so that you can start to see what that process is and breaking it down. But also I hope to share with you how I went from randomly, doing the different jobs I was doing, even like in college, to somehow ending up with the career that I have now, so that you know that everybody's got a pathway and a journey. But I want to really inspire you to be able to know that you can accomplish things, and that things don't always work out exactly how you plan, but that's like kind of the fun part about it, right? So without a further ado, I'm going to actually share my screen with you now and show you guys and walk you through what my job as a concept artist is, because I think a lot of people, it's kind of hard to explain what it is. So I'm just going to show you. Okay, so costume concept art for motion picture. And that's basically what my job is. So I'm going to show you a little reel of how my job, or what my job entails in my work. And then we can get started after that.
We thank you, Guardians, for putting your lives on the line.
Who has been?
Official S.H.I.E.L.D. activity.
king!
So that's probably, I think, one of the, let me make sure I'm going, here we go. That's a sampling of my job, right? So you can see it shows the illustration, then it shows you how it showed up in the actual, presentation of the movie that makes it to you, or the television show or whatever, right? The studying that went involved in that is that I graduated from Cal State Long Beach. And I majored primarily in illustration. I did a minor in film just so that I could meet the film students and stuff like that, just because that's how crafty I am. But I couldn't keep both of those majors because it was too hard. I would have never been able to complete because they were both very challenging majors, right? And so what I want to show you guys is how we think about these things, so you can start to see how that training was put into action, which is basically, I had a general illustration background. So I learned, watercolor, oil, charcoal, all those traditional things. And then I probably only learned Photoshop, I think, in my last semester right before I graduated. So it's like I learned a lot of traditional stuff, but my main thought was, I was like, maybe I'll do animation, or I thought I'd do children's books or like editorial illustration. I didn't know what specifically I wanted to do. I just know that I had a focus in character. So when we start these projects, when we're on a movie, right, first day, read the script, trying to figure out who these people are, we usually will do something called a mood board, right? So you're seeing a few mood boards that I've used for various projects, where starting with the characters, starting with the script, trying to figure out, okay, how are we going to do this? So that first board is like African Mask. I'm pretty sure that was from Black Panther, when I was trying to get my mind into, African aesthetic. What is African aesthetic? What does African art look like? What's the tone of that? And then you'll see various ones, from men's suiting to fashion to all those things. This is just something that we always do in order to keep ourselves kind of like pushing towards the goal of figuring out who these characters are, right? So this is my office from a project, and you can see that this is just me putting up a complete mood board that had pictures of all these different things that I feel matched the character that I was working on at the time. And then all my notes and my folders and drawings and notes to myself and all these different things of trying to figure out, okay, who are these people, and like, what can I do to kind of flesh this out? And often I'm working with the costume designer of the film, right? So the costume designer has all these ideas of who they think the characters are. I'm adding to those things and collaborating with them and trying to figure out, okay, like, how can we sell these ideas to the studio or to the director or whoever we're looking at, right? So this is where everything usually starts. And that could be for regular clothes right on up to superheroes that you guys are used to seeing that, obviously are designed, but you'd be surprised just to see how many things look regular that are also designed. So I'll get to that later. Let's start with Guardians, right? So this is Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 2. What my assignment was, so you're seeing, here's my like mood board or some of the images that I had available. My assignment was, I worked with costume designer Judiana Makovsky, and she said, okay, we've got these gold people. They're called the Sovereign. They're, I think they're aesthetically perfect. I want them to look like columns. So you see the column shape. I want them to have some inspiration from Klimt. Gustav Klimt, and we want to have 20s headdress shapes, like, grand shapes from like the 20s. So it's like, okay, cool, let me try and figure that out. So I went to, right next door to my office at the time, at the Marvel warehouse, there's a place called, it's like a specialty ideation or specialty costume room. And in that room, it's craftspeople that just sit and try to figure out how to make pieces of things that you can use for the costume. So in this case, we're making this alien race of gold people, and we know they want them to be like Klimt and ornate. So they're pulling chain, they're pulling netting, they're pulling fixtures from like the fixture store, like cabinet stuff, all kinds of things that they can spray paint gold and use for these costumes. So you can see my hand there. I'm like actually putting this up to the mannequin to see what the scale is. And I'm taking pictures of all these different materials, because then if I use them in my drawing and that illustration gets approved, we already know we have the materials to make it look like what I'm drawing. So this was kind of a really great process, at least in terms of, for me, to be able to kind of start with some ideation and some creation based on that brief that you saw before, which is what my assignment was. You can see my hand holding up on the black mannequin. That's actually the actress that they've scanned digitally and then, regrown out her body so that we have her actual body in the studio to work on, right? And that's how we usually work for superhero stuff. So there's a lot of different pieces that go into this stuff. So now I start to draw, right? So I'm just drawing variations of this theme and trying to think about what these shapes can be. So this is me just trying to figure it out. At one point, they added in the color navy because they wanted them to feel more royal. So they thought instead of it just being completely gold, let's add in a different color. That actual choice ended up kind of being something that stayed throughout the process. And if you look at this one that's on the right-hand side, that's the version that's closest to what it ended up being in the actual film. And that's what they looked like. So it's kind of like you can see the process and kind of how we go down the line, choices are made, and it just continues down a whole line of costume professionals in order to get to the point where they are looking like what you see here, right? Captain Marvel, same thing. Now that you guys know the process, here's some mood board. I was supposed to do some training outfits. And it's like, okay, let's try and figure this out. Let's do these things. So I've got these training outfits and they're supposed to be on this other planet. So I'm like, oh, it could be high tech. It's breathable mesh. It's all these different things. And I'm thinking it's super high tech. And I'm like, where are they going to be training? We're like, we don't know, maybe virtual reality. So I start to draw again, right? So I'm thinking about putting these textures in and curating these shapes. And I'm designing these like crazy, like workout type training outfits, right? Within a VR space. So I'm going for that. You can see the different changes. And it's just really about going down the line and trying to keep myself open to trying different things, trying sleeves, not sleeves, pants, not pants, whatever it's going to be, long sleeves. But I was just trying to design something that could be fun, right? And of course, they ended up turning out looking like this, which looks nothing like what I drew. And ultimately, the reason they changed it is because they wanted her suit, because it's the first time that we see her as a hero. They wanted the suit to be the primary focus, and they wanted these to be way more simple. So they didn't want it to be, when you finally see her all dressed up in her costume, that's the star, right? Same thing here. I put in Sam Jackson just to show you guys that we do draw things sometimes just so they can see. They're like, what does a young Sam Jackson look like as a detective before he gets to, being, Nick Fury, like we know him to be in the films, the subsequent films. So it's just trying to kind of figure out like, well, let's give him a style. So it's just drawing those things, but all these things are usually illustrated and drawn before they make it to the screen. Same thing here, Supreme Intelligence. This was a character that was actually in the movie. And it was supposed to be, it's that big floating green head, right? So this character, that's the way it's always looked in the comic book. And I had nothing to go off past. They said the Supreme Intelligence is going to be presenting itself as a woman to try and trick Captain Marvel into trusting it, right? So to trusting the Supreme Intelligence. So I start to draw. So I take a figure, I pose it in 3D, I made it kind of symmetrical. This will make sense later. And then I have the moire pattern, which I was trying to think of something like, moire is kind of like the strobing pattern that I was thinking about, the fact that this giant head is in liquid. There's also, I had a book that just showed things at a very close level, like very microscopic level. So I was looking at organic stuff like that. And then in the right-hand corner on the bottom, that's a fabric that was actually fiber optic that when you turn it on, it lights up green, which was kind of cool, right? So you can see here that same pose, I took it, I multiplied it a few times, and in Photoshop, I drew with the symmetry tool on, which basically when you draw on one side, it finishes the other side. And I did the pose this way because I knew it would speed up my process so that I could just get out ideas. And I knew that the costume designer, Sonia Hayes, Sonia wanted something that felt like a gown or something opulent, so she could be standing there and she could light up green and it could be really cool, but still not menacing, so that Captain Marvel trusted her. So we're like, okay, let's go with that. So she picked a couple of her favorites. And then what I did is I took that same model that you guys just saw, put it in 3D, turned it green to make it feel more like that liquid that you saw from the big green head. And then I started to draw stuff like this. So I started to combine that combination with saying, okay, I know we're going to have fiber optics. I know I want to do something that feels kind of like armor and feels alien and feels different. I added some tentacles to it. So I'm just trying to be creative and think of different things that I can put here. In these two versions, I'm thinking more gown-like. you can see in the one on the right, I'm even adding stuff in like the underskirt part, the flowy little transparent part, that's actually beta fishtails. So I just took some beta fishtails and put them in there thinking that they might look like something organic or weird. And of course, in the film, she ended up looking like this. So again, I will give you this guy to say, sometimes things don't make it to the screen. And the reason why they picked this was they felt at the end, they said, because she's trying to get her to trust her, if she looks like her, she looks like a person she recognizes, and she has on the Captain Marvel suit, then she feels more familiar. So that's why they ended up going with that. Now, lastly, I did some own personal work for myself. I like to do translation sometimes. So I took the classic 1980s anime Akira, and I mixed it with African aesthetic to do like some Afrofuturistic kind of like, you know, play on this project that I love so much, or this anime that I love so much. And so I wanted to try and translate that, using some of the things that I learned about African culture from Black Panther. So you'll see more of my process this time, which is I took a figure, I sketched out my ideas of what, you know, the lead character could be. And this was me just going from page to page to page and just drawing and trying to get shapes that I thought were interesting or that I liked. Then I pose the figure. Sorry for the nudity again. I know it's weird. Like usually just is just the way that I start. I start with a nude figure just so that I can put it together. So I posed it, put the lighting and stuff I wanted to use. And then I started to sketch on top of it. So you can see my process of then going and taking the little thumbnails that I like, the thumbnail small sketches that I liked from that previous page, putting them together. And then I'll show you my process. So that process, that's my actual process where you can see me working and just trying to figure things out. And in the final version of that, there's so many different kind of cultural aesthetic things that like I put in there specifically for the characters, just to make sure that they kind of match the initial tone of the anime, but then also went somewhere else. Which I kind of always end up doing just for myself. And then this is another process video for the lead villain in the piece, which is Tetsuo. So I turned Tetsuo into a girl, and I'll show you that process as well.
Move your body, shake your butt, move your body, shake your butt, over, 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 over. Usumami, usuma, usumami, usumami, usuma, usumami.
So this is how those pieces turned out, right? And this is kind of like the pinnacle of me just trying to design and figure out what these are, trying to keep pieces of the anime that I like, but then also trying to put it culturally into a different place and see how that aesthetic worked out. And it was fun. It was a fun exercise for me just to kind of try and see if I could play around with it. Some key things that I'll point out to you guys, just so you know how I design, is I try to put things in for myself that make sense, but also aren't just placed for no reason. So you see that cool hook braid, that braid is from the Himba tribe. And that braid usually for them symbolizes them kind of growing from like, you know, from being a boy into a man, right? It's kind of like their adolescence, right? So I put that hook there specifically because in the actual anime, Canada, who's the main character, is kind of growing into himself. He has to protect everyone, but he's also very much so on the street, and he's kind of learning his place in the world, and he is evolving and growing and becoming more mature. So that braid for me symbolized that. So that's why I decided to use it for this character, along with a few other choices. Like he's got some braiding and roping from Senegalese wrestlers. There's some key balances in here that I just tried to do, and then other stuff just because I thought it was cool. Like I liked the using these kind of like almost zebra tennis shoes but turning them into sandals. Like there was stuff that I just wanted to kind of do to make it feel a little different. That bike in there, they usually, you know, Akira is known for having these iconic bikes, but I decided to use in Congo, they have these bikes called chukurus. They're like scooters. They're like these cool wooden scooters. I mean, you should look them up. They're awesome. But I basically tried to translate one of those into a bike that then maybe had some mechanical pieces or something, so that it was just a different aesthetic. Same thing here with Tetsuo. Tetsuo was traditionally a boy, changed it to a female just because I wanted to do a male and a female character, but also because I wanted to challenge myself to try something different. You'll see here those two braids, those are also Himba braids, so same tribe, but those braids represent young Himba women, right? So young girls, right? The Himba are famously known for, if you've seen them, they're usually covered in like red pigment, and they have clay in their hair. So they have all this red clay in their hair. They usually look like red from head to toe. You've probably seen that. That's what the women look like, right? So I purposefully used an adolescent hairstyle, a child's hairstyle for Tetsuo, because Tetsuo refuses to grow up, is impetuous, and doesn't listen. So it's like, those are the types of things when I look at when I'm trying to character design, to make sure that even if it's something that doesn't make sense to the viewer, it makes sense to me. And it's like puzzle solving. Also on her viewer's left hip, some of those patterns are more female Himba, and then the blue fabric is more male. So it's like trying to kind of figure out like different things to show she has male and female energy. So that's something that I do just when I'm designing in general. So let me stop sharing screen, and I will talk to you guys a little bit more, which is basically, that's the presentation that I have in terms of showing you how I approach design. How I got here is a different story, which is basically, growing up, I was an actor, right? So I was basically in Hollywood already from like 3 until around like 16, 17. So all of my formative years were spent either doing something in front of the camera or working, you know, commercials. I did television shows. I did all of those things, right? So that was kind of what I thought I wanted to do, was just, you know, do that. And speaking to the times, because it's been different now, but we're still all going through it now. The reason I stopped acting is because once I became a teen, you know, especially like after like 16, so I'm driving now and I'm super excited because up until that point, like my school day had literally been, you know, I'd go to school, my mom would pick me up or my dad would pick me up. We get directly on the freeway and drive into Hollywood, and I go on my auditions and do my lines and do whatever that is, come back home, eat dinner, hang out. You know, that was a normal day for me. And then whenever I was working on set, I'd be out of school for a week or two or whenever it is, and I'd be working, and then I would come back and I'd have all my homework. So I was very used to this at this point. I come a teenager, and now I'm like excited because I can drive myself to my audition. So now I'm going to school, you know, I get out of school, I drive and go to my auditions. My agent sends me my, you know, my lines, my sides or whatever. So I'm kind of looking at those and trying to figure out what I'm going to audition for, but it's all stuff that's recognizable, right? So I'm like, oh, today I've got an audition for ER. Like I was like, this is going to be awesome. So I drive down, I know the people, I'm like, oh, this will be great. I start reading my lines and I'm like, wait, what's going on? And it's like, okay, your name's Jamal and you're a gang member and you get shot, and then everybody's trying to help you turn your life around. And I'm like, okay, I got it. It's acting fine. So then the next day it's like, okay, you know, now you're auditioning for this other show. And I'm like, awesome. And they're like, okay, your name's Jamal. And I'm like, again? And then they're like, it's a different guy, Jamal. And it's like, this time you get ran over by a fire truck and they're trying to help you turn your life. I'm like, okay, wait. So it's like, I bring that up to say every single role was the same person. And specifically for me, every single role was the same Black person, the same Black male. So I got really frustrated and I decided, you know what? I don't want to represent Black men on television this way. I'm a little burned out. I just feel like it's one of those things where at bare minimum, I can act and I can do those jobs. But what was missing for me, or what was really missing for me, was saying, hey, there are other types of people. How come we're not showing them? Like, I was like, at bare minimum, every once in a while, I should run against or run up against a role that's like my family, which is like both of my parents graduated from UCLA, like highly educated, upper middle class, like just like not what you would see what they were showing on television. Just like it's like past being everybody just always goes and yanks the Cosby Show back up, like, oh, the Cosby Show. And I'm like, it's been so long. Why are we still talking about the Cosby Show? There should be so many more shows that are like this, you know? So I took a break and I said, you know what? I'm going to figure out what I want to do. The other thing that I always did, no matter what, when I was in my trailer or when I was just in between stuff, was draw. Right. So I was always drawing. It's just something I've done since I was little. So I said, you know what? I think maybe at bare minimum, what I'll do is when I go to college, I'm going to draw and I'll figure out if I can combine my love of drawing with my love of film. So that's how by the time I got to Cal State Long Beach, my goal was I'm going to draw and I'm going to learn to draw, but I'm also going to try to see if I can combine that with film, which is why I minored in film, met all the film kids, and then dropped film. And then by that point, I was already working. So I had been working pretty much in establishing my career. Something that someone told me very early on in the beginning parts of college was when you get out of school, it's different now too, by the way. So this is old advice, but when you get out of school, it takes 2 to 3 years before you're not calling people and people are calling you. So me being the smartass that I am, I thought if I do that in college, then when I get out of college, then I won't have to spend that 2 to 3 years waiting for people to call me. So that's literally how I thought about it. So every semester break I had off between like fall or winter break or fall break or spring break or whatever it was, I would always try to be working on something that I was shooting. So like working on a commercial, working on a music video, working on whatever, working on a student project. So there were lots of student films. So I met all those kids. So I'm production designing and doing set design for them. So I did that. And by the time I graduated, I had already literally started to work on stuff, including one short film I worked on right before I graduated, I think. It's called West Bank Story, and it ended up winning the Oscar for the best like short film, right? So it's like I prop mastered it, and it was just a crazy thing to just work on, but it was literally while I was still in school, just because I had made those contacts. So, and I bring that up to say that I just was very adamant about that, but I'm also very talkative. So I'm the person that'll go in, I'll meet people, I'll cold email people or cold call people, or I'll, dress up in a suit and I'll go and I'll walk and I'll show my resume, all the old school stuff. Like I definitely do all those things, which I think you should do those things too. But I definitely was really kind of very laser focused on trying to see if I could get my career to go somewhere. So where I moved from there, I graduate, I'm working literally just by luck. I go to Comic-Con the year that I graduate. So Comic-Con in San Diego, the big one, right? And I graduate in June. It's like, so now it's freshly graduated. Like, what am I going to do with my life? Which is what everybody does. Like, what are we doing? Where are we going? How is this going to happen? Go to Comic-Con, which I was just like, okay, I don't know why, but I went there because I always go, but I also went because I wanted to show my portfolio to see if I could get illustration work. So when we got there, it was me, my friend Oksana, and my friend Brian. And we had gone to basically show our portfolios to get work. There was a panel of costume designers there. Now, the only reason we knew what that was because one of our teachers at Long Beach, Robin Richardson, she was a costume illustrator and she also did storyboards. So like just casually, it's not like she talked to us about her job all the time. Just in between breaks, we'd come back and be like, oh, Robin, what'd you work on? And she's like, oh, I storyboarded a movie called Aeon Flux. And we're like, awesome. And then we'd continue on about our day. Like it wasn't a big deal, right? So the thing we recognized, we're like, isn't that what Robin does? That panel of costume designers, isn't that what she was talking about? Like, so we went and we checked it out. And it was random because we were on our way somewhere else. And we're like, let's go check this out instead. Sat down, saw this panel of like high costume designers, like including one of the one I mentioned before, Judiana Makovsky, the one I did Guardians with. She had done Harry Potter. So she was there talking about Harry Potter. There was a few other people talking about different films. And so we go watch. We're like, that's cool. Maybe we can show them our portfolio. So they had an autograph table after. We go talk to them about showing our portfolio, and they're like, you guys are really good, you should join the guild. Didn't think anything of it, because literally we showed our portfolio that entire weekend to different people. The next week, Oksana gets a call from Isis Musindin, who's a costume designer, and she says, I really loved your portfolio. How would you like to go to Prague with me for 8 months to do Narnia 2? This is straight out of school. So she calls me, Phil, like one of those designer people called me, like we didn't know anything about this. One of those costume people called me and asked me to go. And so she leaves. She has a week where she gets hired, and the next week she goes to Prague for 8 months to go do Narnia, right? So I'm just sitting there like, whoa, this is incredible. What a great job. And then I'm still working. So I'm production designing, I'm doing music videos and doing that whole deal. And towards the end of the year, I decided, you know what, she's having a great time. I should try to join just as an offshoot of like, maybe this is something else I can do when I'm not doing videos or anything else. So I joined December of that year. And in January, a month to the day that I joined, I got hired on The Mummy 3, which was the one with Jet Li, like the Tomb of the Dragon Emperor or something like that. And that was my first job, and I've been working ever since. Did I go to school to study to do costumes specifically? No. But did I like drawing people? Yes. So it's like I had interest, but you can see that's like a whole, like I just went all these different directions before I landed on where I wanted to be. But the key things that helped me to do that was being consistent. I did very much so try to take jobs within the field that I was in. Jason will remember this. I was actually working at a credit union for the longest time, and they kept promoting me. So it kept going, like I was like part-time, and then they're like, okay, do you want to work full-time? And then they're like, do you want to be a loan officer? And I think by that point I was like, I need to leave. So I quit, and they were so mad. They were like, why are you quitting? And I was like, I told you I don't want to do this. And I could see my life being like, it would be 10 years later and I'd be like the branch manager or something, and I'd be like, how did I get here? You know what I mean? Like that type of deal. So I was very adamant about saying, at bare minimum, I'd rather work in an art store or a photography, anywhere that just keeps me in line with where I want to go. So that's something that I will try to say to all of you guys is right now you have time. There is time to make choices. Just try to put yourself in line with the things, and also surround yourself with like-minded people, right? So surround yourself with the people that you can see that have similar goals or mindsets. You really are who you hang out with. You let people say you are what you eat. You are who you hang out with, who you're around. And then I think it's also one of those things too. It's just staying very adamant with being mentally aware of not only where you want to go, but also keeping your eye on the goal, because it's very easy to lose sight of what your goal is. It starts to become about other things. You get distracted, it moves around, and you just have to say, what's my goal? My goal is to be in entertainment, or my goal is to do this, or my goal is to do that. And set actual goals, especially with entertainment. Don't set goals like, I want to be famous. That's not a real goal. Not a real goal at all. Or I want to meet famous people. Whatever it is, those aren't goals. Like you have to say, like, what's the job? Let me try to figure out what the actual job is and try to be as good at it as I can. And I think that that will always back you up and kind of propel you forward and take you to places that you've never thought. You saw in my reel, everyone's always surprised, I got to work with Madonna 3 times. I did 3 separate tours with Madonna. Who knew that I would have been able to do that with illustration? Like, it's such a random thing, right? But at the same time, I was open to being able to keep my portfolio open, learn new skills. The key thing about that is also making sure that you're open to learning. So don't stop learning, because I know a lot of people get stuck. I always find that when I'm stuck in any capacity, even if it's just in a drawing, it's because I've stopped learning. Like I'm phoning it in, right? So I have to say, like, what can I jog my memory with, or what can I jog my mind with? Sometimes I'll make those boards like you guys saw, like that board that you saw, the African mask, that was literally at a point where I felt stuck. And then I realized I didn't know enough about African culture to keep moving forward. I exhausted my materials. I exhausted my predetermined, like all the knowledge I had wasn't enough. So I had to learn. So those are the things that I would say. And where I am now, this is the last video that I'll share with you and then take questions and stuff and kind of talk to you, is I've now started the first Black-owned concept art collective called 9B, which is basically primarily all Black and people of color. And the reason I've done that is because very much so, there's been like, I don't want to say it's a hiring freeze. There's been a thing where hiring diversely behind the scenes, especially in Hollywood, has been a great challenge. Within doing, I'd say, my 12th year of doing this job that I'm doing right now, the 12th year was the first year that I ever sat next to another Black artist, period. So up until that point, I had sat next to no other Black artist. Black Panther with Ruth Carter, who ended up winning the Oscar for costume, she was my first Black boss. So up until that point, I hadn't had any experience with that. Not to say that it's something that stresses me out or I'm like, oh my God, I'm by myself. It's just, we all know how important it is to be around like-minded people or to see yourself in something. And so I think that that's something that was important to me to be able to pay that forward. And as I got to work on like movies like Black Panther, I worked on A Wrinkle in Time, actually both of those at the same time. The key thing for me that shifted it, which was a full circle moment for me, is as I told you guys how I grew up and why I stopped acting, I realized that I was a part of two different projects. One obviously better than the other. If you've seen A Wrinkle in Time, you know exactly what I'm talking about. It was a hot mess. Two movies that basically showed my daughter, my little one, like that she could be whatever she wanted. So it's like, I knew that for her, it felt full circle because for her, it's different now, right? She gets to see a little girl go on an adventure. She gets to see Black Panther and Lupita and all those like great characters in Shuri, you know, having technology. She gets to see all those things along with her television shows. Her first president is Barack and Michelle, you know, like she gets to see those things. So I recognize that things were different. We still have a ways to go, but it was something that helped me to then formulate where I am now, which is to make a company to where people won't have that same story I have. And ultimately, I want to unify artists of color to where not only are they getting jobs that they're kind of not getting, but I also want to make sure that they're getting a chance to work together. So I'll show you guys a little video for that, and then I'll take some questions.
Outstanding.
You're lost.
Pants.
Oh, you goddamn right. I want to be counted. Do that shit. Do that shit. Do it. I say when I die.
How was that a threat?
Some of us could be killed.
Welcome back.
And that is my company. So that's what I've started to do now, which is that's the next stage of everything. Is I'm trying to unify artists of color. I'm trying to get it to where the studios are more diversely balanced. And then I also want to make sure that I'm doing things like talking to students. One of the things that we've also decided to do is we're going to go back and actually mentor, because I recognize that there's a problem, not in terms of just hiring people, but also creating artists, you know, creating more artists. So going back and speaking to elementary school kids about stuff, we've partnered with different companies like Wacom and with Adobe and Procreate and stuff like that, so we can leave the kids with things to practice on, so that they're not, I recognize it's like going there and talking about my big fancy job is great, but not having the resources. I remember going to a school and I said, hey, and I was saying, how many of you guys, watch whatever? And one of the students raised their hand and said, I don't have TV and I've never been to the movies. So knowing that there was that underserved, I was like, it's not enough to just go visit them, show them your job and pack it up. You have to leave them with something, even if it's just material. So I know that as we build and kind of grow, that's something that we're going to be really trying to do as well. But that's my spiel. That's my job. That's where I come from. So thank you guys very much for having me. I mean, if you have any questions, please let me know. I'd love to answer.
Yes, so if anyone has any questions, I think feel free to put them in the chat or unmute yourself. We welcome both. But yeah, thank you, Phil, for sharing all that. It was an incredible presentation.
No problem. Thank you.
Hey, Phil, great work. Just real quick, just for some quick context, you mentioned the idea of Afrofuturism. Can you just briefly, share what that is? So for those who may not have heard it or may not know as much about it, they can better understand what Afrofuturism is and maybe how that relates to your work as well.
Yeah, I think I really started to get on that between it was more. It's hard to explain. I'm trying to give it like a simple answer for Afrofuturism because it's so many different things, but it's basically kind of showing the, I always say this wrong, the diaspora, like trying to show like the plight of Black people and trying to show how they can triumph, but also showing where they've been and where they can go, right? So it's kind of, at bare minimum, I think about it visually as just being able to show different sides of people that we're not used to seeing. So it's like, I want to show the complexities of just saying, okay, there are varying types of people within the range of people that you see. So when you see a character on TV, it's always like the sassy Black girl or something like that, right? I want to show, but there's also the very quiet, like Issa Rae, there's the quiet, awkward Black girl. Like there's that girl too. There's, the really like out there flamboyant queen, and then there's the very masculine butch I wouldn't say normal, like what I'm trying to say. It's like basically there's different types of gay people, there's different types of just women, there's different types of everyone, like fat, big, small, like whatever it is, trans. It's showing that there are different types of people and we need to be open to all of them, and we need to, because we're all here together, right? It's like it's one of those things where I think that with Afrofuturism, just moving it forward, it peppers in the landscape of showing the differences of people. But it also is going to now show, specifically in Hollywood, I think it's one of those things where they only show the same type over and over again. So I'm like, you know what? Like, I would say, even though it's not futuristic or futurist, I would say, I want to see like, where is the movie about like Black dragon riders? Like, where's that? Like, where is that? Like, I want to see that. Like, I would like to see just something different where it's not like, okay, we're like, let's do a superhero. And it's like, okay, but he starts in the hood. And you're like, no, how about he just starts in a regular place? And they're like, okay, but his mom is a crack addict. It's like, no, stop doing that. Like, please stop doing that. Just show me a regular person and then, expand them out. So that's kind of where we are, at least in terms of broader thinking. There's a much more scholarly answer for what futurism is. But I think that for me, it just represents showing where we can go as a people and showing triumph, and also just showing kind of this breaking of being stuck in the past, right? To being stuck in like our historical past and just moving past it. So I think that that's something that kind of like you can apply those ideals and principles to pretty much anything. But that's kind of what it means to me. And so what I've been trying to also do is provide respect for African culture. I learned that a lot, actually. That was not something that was something that was in my background, even for just growing up, right? Like when I grew up, my parents are Catholic, so I went to Catholic church. And every Black History Month, everybody would dress up in like African garb for every Sunday service, right? So we all had our African stuff, and it's just something that became a normal part. But as I went to do Black, I realized like it's just like I don't know what any of those things are. Like I could have been wearing patterns that say like Americans are idiots. I didn't know what those patterns were. You know what I mean? Like you have no idea. It's like just putting on something. And so then what I did is that when I worked on Black Panther, I actually started to study the tribes, and I could tell you their names, and I can tell you what the beads mean and what the colors mean, and like what do they put in their hair? Why? What are they rubbing on their skin? What are the wrestlers rubbing on their skin before their matches? Why does it look spiritual? Like I can tell you so many things that I learned. And it was because then I was not only giving it the respect, but also really trying to pare it down and learn something. And I feel like we should all do that. One of the examples that I give is a long answer, but one of the examples that I give is Beyonce's Homecoming. How many of you guys saw that? Or did you guys watch that, right? So Homecoming, the fear that in doing something like that was that people are going to miss it. They're going to be like, do it. Does everyone know about HBCUs? Do they know why we're moving like this? And Beyonce said, I'm not going to tell you. I'm just going to do it. And then if you want to know more, you'll learn about it. You'll adapt. You'll say, why is she dancing this way? Why does that song, why does it sound this way? Why is the band playing this way? What's the humor of this? Like it's those things. And I feel like that's the kind of art that we all need to put out now. We need to put out art that basically says, hey, adapt to me now. Like basically, if you want to learn why this is cool, then you will go and you'll learn something and you'll figure it out outside of yourself. And I think if we all start doing that for each other, everything would just be better. I see a question that says, do you feel Bridgerton did this? I do in a way. There was a few parts. I have some picky stuff with Bridgerton, but for the most part, I feel like the thing that made me most excited about Bridgerton, besides the costumes, what the costume designer is a friend of mine, was showing it opened up this world where it didn't matter what your race was. It just kind of just showed them all together in high society in a setting that would have probably never been that way or was not that way. So I did enjoy that. I enjoyed that quite a lot, just seeing them actually play with the idea and just kind of pushing it forward without really addressing it. I'll tell you, Leslie, my pinpoint with it is there is a line, I feel like it's in like the fifth or sixth episode, where they address race, where I felt like they almost had it and they didn't need to do it. And I'll leave that to you guys. I feel like the key example that I'll say of this would be, do you guys remember that horrible movie that Will Smith did? Do you remember Wild Wild West? Does everybody remember that movie? So the reason I felt it was horrible was because when Will took the role, Jim West was, a white actor or a white character, right? So it's like Will Smith playing that character was a big deal at the time. Like, oh my gosh, they're going to have Will Smith play Jim West, right? And so I thought it was great. And what they talked about at the time was that he's just Jim West. They're not going to address it. But then in the movie, they're constantly referring to him as boy and things like that. They're addressing this historical reference that to me didn't need to be there and didn't fit. Why? Because there's a big giant mechanical spider. So it's like, if you can show me a mechanical spider, why do you then get stuck in like, but in history, this is what they would have said, or this is what they would have done. It's like that world could have been just like Bridgerton, where it's just Jim West is just a black guy. This person, Selma Hayek is Latin. So-and-so's white. It doesn't matter. It just could have been a fantastical movie. So that's where it lost me. So it's like when I move forward now, I try to think about things like that in creating the content where it just says, put characters like that Brandy Cinderella with Cinderella. It was like, just put them together and don't address it because it doesn't matter, because it's a fantasy. How do you get stuck in historical context and like right next to you, there's like a Muppet standing next to you? Like why did you get stuck in being real only in this point? Just expand, So that's kind of something that I think about when I'm working constantly, is just making sure that I'm expanding and making sure that it doesn't really matter. I think it's more fun that way. I see a question from.
Thank you, Phil.
No problem.
For that.
No problem at all. I enjoy creating the content, but I also want to make sure, I just want everyone to feel included. That's like, I think my main goal. And I want everyone to feel like they're learning. I also am very much a proponent of, you would find, especially over this last year, everyone had challenges. We all had all of this stuff going on, the election, all of these things. I had conversations with everyone. And what I did is I wanted to learn. I wanted to learn, like, I may not agree with you, but I want to learn why. and I want to know why we don't agree. And I'm fine with us disagreeing, but I don't want to shut you down. I don't want to call you names. I just am very much so not that person. I want to know, why do we disagree? Why are we not being able to find the middle, and why can't we move forward? That's the key thing. And I think in entertainment has a great responsibility. Even though people say, I'm just an entertainer, it's not my responsibility. Entertainment has one of the biggest responsibilities for making sure that those ideals show through, because when you think about the country and the fact that we're all isolated, right? Like in terms of like being apart from each other, I know very much so there are places where there are no Black people whatsoever. So if I constantly show all of them as gang members, guess what those people think? It's like programming. So you have to make sure that you're showing a broad range, and that goes for everyone. It's just a broad range of all different characters, all different people. So it's something that I really try to you can tell I actually think about it all the time and trying to make sure that I'm kind of not stepping in landmines, but it is hard to do. I see Alexandra says, you mentioned earlier the importance of having mentors. Do you have any advice to students about finding and connecting to mentors? The first thing that I will say is this is the key thing for your generation, because it's much different now. I don't want to age us, but I graduated college in 2006 or something. I don't know. It just like feel old now. But basically, I'm even looking at Jason. I haven't seen him in a while. I was like, gray hair, where'd that come from? I think it's easier for you guys, and I'll tell you why. You have the internet. You have you can literally now when I say cold call, I mean like you watched a movie and you're like, wow, I love that costume design. Look up who the costume designer is. I can almost guarantee you 9 times out of 10, you'll find their email online somewhere. Email them. Just email them and say, I really enjoyed this. Would you mind taking on a mentorship? Can I PA for you? Now, that doesn't mean everybody will write you back, but you'd be so surprised by how many people that in your mind, you have a blocker of this being this high up person where they will actually write you back, and they'll actually give you good advice, or they'll tell you something that you didn't know, or they'll inspire you to go on a path that you hadn't gone on. Also, just within your own student network, start small. It doesn't have to be big, meaning you're surrounded right now with students that do the exact same thing or have the same likes as you, right? So if you're surrounded by 3 films and you guys all love sketch comedy, write something and shoot it together. You have your phones. You can do a whole thing on your phone. Like you can do whatever you want. You got TikTok. I've seen people do incredible edits and stuff with TikTok, where it's just them and their finger and them playing around with it. So it's like you have the tools that we didn't have. Like we had to it was much harder. Had to go in and meet people and try to go to things and network and all that. You still have to do those things, but you can do it a lot faster now and a lot easier. And you can do it. I now have friends that I'm talking to that I've never met in person, but are in South Africa. You know what I mean? You can do it all over the place now. So I'd say to make sure that that's a kind of goal to have. And then when things obviously open back up, try to go and put yourself in a position to be in the same place as some of these people. There's a place in Hollywood called Western Costume where we rent costumes, and costume designers set up their office to start projects. So what I did is I knew that there were costume designers there. I put on a suit, had my briefcase, my whole satchel, the whole nerdy the whole thing. And I went and showed my portfolio. That's just being on par with making sure that I was in front of people, showing them, hey, I'm in this union now. Can I work with you? That type of deal. That's something that you have to do.